start out here real quick with I'll try to go very quickly, and we'll get into A6s.
Okay.
But before we get into A6s,
I want to get into the A4s too. Let's.
the A4, yeah, and then because I went from, my first sea tour, I was supposed to be in A4s for 3 years, 3.5 years. I went from A4s after one deployment to A3s. I went from the smallest airplane on a carrier to the largest airplane on a carrier.
At that time. Bigger than the Vigi?
Yes. Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
That must have been fun.
And I did it on the 27 Charlie on the Essex class carrier. I did it on the Lexington, the Lexington size carrier, with the A3, and then I went from the A3 to the A6. So I went in that progression right there. And then my first cruise in the A4s was, we went around South America, came back, I went to, we were shore-based for some period of time, and then we deployed. I don't remember exactly when we deployed.
This was what year? And what squadron?
It's got this big book here.
Okay. Look at all the log books.
Well, these are all, I've got some more up here.
Whoa.
Oh my goodness.
This is what I was telling you about.
This is nice history. It is amazing. Do you want to sit here?
No, I can just
You
look
sure?
over his shoulder for a second. Yeah.
Okay. In July of '62, we flew out to Oceana, or to Norfolk, on July 19th of 1962, and we came back on September 14th. That's when we finished this South American cruise.
And that was with which squadron?
VA 56.
Okay. In the A6?
No.
No, you were in the
A4.
A4 at that time. Okay. So an A4 logbook looks different than an A6 driver's logbook?
Nope.
Well, where's your column for your bombardier?
That's over here in remarks.
Okay.
Gotcha. Cubic point. Okay, we deployed in the A4 on the USS Ticonderoga, a small carrier, and we did that in February of '63, and March, April, May, June. Yeah, June. We came back in June of '63. While we were in Hong Kong, probably in May, I'm just guessing. Yeah, let's just say the middle of May. Flying A4s. I was got a call from the XO West McDowell, and he said, "Woody, the skipper wants to see you in his stateroom." And I said, "What did I do now?" And I was Lieutenant JG. I think I had just put on my silver bar.
Nugget.
And went into the stateroom, and he said, Woody, I just got a message. I've got to pick 2 pilots and send them from Lemoore to Whidbey Island, Washington. And I said, well, why? He says, we want to fly the A3. And I just thought, holy shit, I went up and I to the flight deck, and I remember one to the night, we had 3 of those on board, and looked at that big thing, and I thought, holy cow. And the A4s were parked next to it, and I said, this is crazy. What they were trying to do is the A3 was the Navy's answer to all-weather nuclear bombing. That was our SAC. And the A4s were the light attack nuclear throwaway bomber. One bomb, one target. If the ship's here when you get back, good. If not, pick an island, go find it, and live on an island. If the war happens, we had 3 carriers in the Pacific. We had 3 areas: Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie. 2 of them had to be. You had to have two carriers at sea at any one time. And you had nuclear targets either in China, North Korea, or the Soviet Union. That was our main mission in the A4. We were a throwaway nuclear bomber in the early 60s. The A3 was the all-weather bomber. The A4 squadrons planned buddy missions, where an A3 would take 2 A4s, one on each wing, take him to his, in bad weather, take him to his nuclear target, to the A4's nuclear target, drop him off, he would do his loop.
I was going to say, you flung them, right?
Yeah.
You trained to fling them.
You throw it, you toss bomb. You would either do an over the shoulder or an over the top. And then he was on his own, and you didn't care about him anymore. Then he took the A3, then took you to the second A4 to his target, did that, and then the A3 went to his target and finally dropped the bomb that he had in Bombay. So that was SIOP, strategic interoperability program, whatever. That was the master plan. And that's the only reason we had the carriers out there. And we weren't conventional weapons. So we did we fired rockets and guns and whatever, but the big mission was B-nuke. The problem was that the A3 squadrons, the heavy attack squadrons, were the philosophy was, this is too great a mission to be given to junior pilots. There's too much decision making and experience needed, et cetera, et cetera. Unfortunately, what happened was they were putting pilots into the A3s, young pilots. The pilot would come into the A3 program as a bombardier navigator. He would make one deployment in the right seat of the A3 as a bombardier navigator. Then, if he had passed that, he would fly as a pilot. And that way, and so he'd make 2 deployments, one as a BN, one as a pilot, and then he would go to shore duty. Unfortunately, what was happening was they weren't promoting. They weren't staying in the Navy, the pilots that were coming in as junior officers. They were saying, I'm driving this whale around, and my career, I'm competing with A4 pilots, and I'm competing with, I'm just going to get out when my time's up. I'll go back to the training command, and then I'll get out and I'll go fly do whatever. So in that evolution, there were no junior pilots staying in heavy attack that would come back as lieutenant commanders. So they couldn't put them in the front door, so they decided to put them in the back door. And the way they do this is they said, we're going to take selected A4 pilots who already know the nuclear mission from the A4 standpoint. We're going to send them to Whidbey Island. We're going to put them into an A3 squadron directly as a pilot, not as a bombardier. So that I was one of the very first to do that. Several of my friends that I flew with later came in the other way. They came in as the bombardier navigator and then fleeted up. But for one reason or the other, they stayed in the Navy. So the skipper said, you're going to Whidbey Island. So we went, packed up the apartment and drove up to Oak Harbor, Washington, and I started VAH 123, which was the A3 rag. Now, they didn't know what to do with us because all the heavy attack squadrons had seen this earlier progression. And here's the lieutenant junior grade, he's coming in, he isn't gonna be a bombardier navigator, he's gonna be a pilot. Well, can he do it? What do we do? So they sent me through the A3 rag where I had to learn celestial navigation because the other pilots that were junior had to be BNs. So they thought, well, this guy needs to know how to be a celestial navigator. I can remember I came up there were three of us in the class, four of us. It was Dwayne Evans, Low Cox, Bill Aldridge, and myself. And we all came from A4 squadrons, and we all were in the same group. And Bill Aldridge, Dwayne Evans were Naval Academy guys. Low Cox was a NROTC, and I was an ADCAT. So we're going through, and we're doing this celestial navigation problem, and it might be brain surgery as far as I'm concerned. I'm the guy who can't factor, and I'm a guy who still can't use a slide rule. So we're going to, and the way they do it is the final exam was a 4-hour mission, and you would start off, and you'd have to, as time went long on the clock in the room, you were given certain information, and you were doing celestial star shots, and then you were doing sunline pressure pattern stuff, and then you would receive a message that the weather was bad, and it was very complex. Well, I'm going along, and I've been in this class now for about 2 weeks in a classroom, and I'm being instructed by a chief petty officer, and the chief petty officer, the A3 guys had third crewmen, so there were 3 crew in there, and the third crewman was also a crewman navigator. So these were enlisted guys that had worked their way up as plane captains and flying whatevers, and they worked with the bombardier navigator for the missions, for these all-weather missions. And so the chiefs were the instructors. Well, I'm sitting there on this test, and I'm struggling, and the other guys are 2 Naval Academy guys and a OCS guy, and they're doing fine, and I'm sitting there, and there were 2 chiefs in the room, and I would do my stuff for celestial star shot and whatever, and I'd write down angle such and such on the star was shooting, and the chief would say, yeah, here we are right now. Racer. And it went that way for 4 hours. You know, I passed, thanks to chief petty officers back and forth. The same thing happened once before. Morse code. I was dyslexia again, and I'm sitting in a class of it was in pre-flight in Pensacola, and we're going through Morse code, and they got a blinker up there going tick 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 tick, and again it was a chief petty officer, and I would say B, C, F, G. Thank God for chief petty officers. One thing that always helped me was the fact that I had been enlisted, and I had a little bit of. I'd say, I'd make some comment about what in the hell am I doing here? I don't know what it is. And so the chiefs usually took care of me. But long story short, I graduated from 123 and learned how to loft bombs in an A3. You didn't go over the top. You would loft it. You do a B-50, I think it's a B-47 did the same thing. But you'd go in, you'd pull, because we didn't have G-suits, the airplane, the last thing you wanted to ever do was look out of your left shot as a pilot, look out at the wing and watch that engine pylon, because when we do a 3G pull up to release, toss the bomb, then you roll into 152 degrees of roll back around until you got to the burst altitude, whatever altitude the bomb was going to go off. And at that point, you level your wings and you scoot out at an angle. You wouldn't go all the way back like you did in an
like
A4.
no half Cuban.
No half Cuban. Well, you never wanted to look out at that wing and that engine pylon, because that engine pylon's sitting out there just going back and forth. And
the airframe is
and the wing is bending up, and you're, oh God. and A3s have lost. They've actually lofted their engines. It's pull up and the end goes off and then the airplane crashes. And the airplane has no ejection seats. A3D is all three dead. That's what it has, a chute, and you have to slide out the chute, the bottom of the airplane, to bail out. You bailed out of those airplanes. So on a catapult shot, you always took a catapult shot with a hatch open, so that you went into the water, you'd go out through, you'd exit out if you were alive or the airplane stayed in one piece, you'd go out the upper hatch. So you landed and you took off with the upper hatch always open. Well, anyway, I was assigned a detachment. I think I was the Bonhomme Richard. I think it was the Bonnie Dick. And Carol and I were planning our lives. We had moved into an apartment, and then we had rented a house, the first house that we'd ever lived in. And Michael was 1 year old, and we would walk him on the beach at night
to get him to sleep
get him to sleep all night. And Whidbey Island was culturally the backside of the moon. It was a small town, small Dutch farming town. The Navy had come in and during the Second World War had established a base, took some of the best farmland and turned it into a Navy base, upset the Dutch farmers
Went back to Michigan.
Really bad. When we got there were no stoplights in the town. There were 2 flashing yellow lights. The town rolled up at sunset, and that was it. The lights went out, and you were out in the middle of nowhere. Period. So anyway, we had a house, and we were all set, and one of the pilots that was going out on the Hancock was a lieutenant commander. He went down to San Diego to Cairqual, and he had a bad night, and he turned in his wings. And so the skipper called me in and said, "Woody, here you go." Remember, I've been told you I was pulled out and moved into different. He said, "Woody, we're going to send you out with Detachment Lima." And when is that? Well, it's going to deploy in about a month. I had been programmed to go out in about a year. So I have just come back from a Westpac deployment, and I've gone through the RAG. Now I'm not in the squadron. I was going to do my 1 sea duty tour in A3s, and that was going to be down the road. I was going to be with Carol and Mike. Well, long story short, I went out on USS Hancock, and the skipper said, "Thank you, Woody. You took a lot off our plate, and really appreciate it. When you come back, we're not going to send you out anymore. You'll go into the detachment. Heavy Attack Squadron 4 was the one squadron in heavy attack that provided detachments to the small carriers. So the small carriers also had a nuclear strike capability, all-weather strike capability, 3 airplanes. The other carriers, the big decks, had 10 A3s aboard the ship. They were regular sized squadrons. Well, I was going to go fly on the small deck. Well, okay, went fly on the small deck. I went out and spent most of my time in the Philippines, running up and down between the Philippines and Japan, and going out to the ship and getting orders for hibachi pots, and picking up shoes that are made in, just escorting A4s and F8s up to Japan, up to Atsugi in Japan. I did a lot of that. So I came back from that deployment, and now I'm going to be in Dead X-Ray. Dead X-Ray was the detachment that was the core of the squadron that was always at home. And they took care of all the paperwork and all the orders and everything. I was up flying an instrument flight, my instrument check flight, on August 17th or the 19th, I forget which. And I was flying in Whidbey Island, and I had one engine shut down, and I was doing a single engine TACAN approach. And approach control comes up, and they said, "Holly Green 4, your skipper requests you land immediately." And I thought, oh God, something's happened at home. So I lit off the other engine, and that airplane, you had yoke, the throttle's over here, and you had yoke. So I'd gone from the stick to the yoke. So I landed, and I've got another pilot riding with me to grade my instrument check right. And as we're taxiing into the hangar, I see the skipper standing out there outside the hangar. And Dick, I was running with Dick Nielsen, and he said, "Looks like the skipper wants to talk to us." And I said, "Well, when we get out of the airplane, you go right, I'll go left, and we'll see which one he comes to." Well, he came to me, and he walked in. He said, "Woody, I hate to do this to you, but we need to send a pilot to VQ1 at Atsugi, Japan. And I can't tell you much more about it now, but," I said, "When?" He said, "Well, this was about 1 o'clock in the afternoon." He said, "We're going to fly you down to Seattle, Tacoma at midnight tonight." Well, Now Carol has gone through everything with the number of days that we were together in A4s, and we were up at this desolated community up in the middle of nowhere, and windy, gray, rainy. But we've got a house and we've got an apartment, and Carol is beginning to get into. We got a very nice commanding officer and a very nice executive officer, and Carol's beginning to get into
Navy life.
Navy life according to that book. The book. And I come home, and well, the other question I asked the skipper is, how long will I be there? He says, we don't know. So take both your winter and summer uniforms. So I
Packed your bag.
I packed my bag. I came home. Carol wasn't there, and I'm so get packed. It's about 4:30 or 5 o'clock, and Carol comes home. And Michael had been at the nursery school, at daycare or whatever, and you can tell.
And I came in and I saw his bag. And I said, what's that? And so he says, well, we'll sit down and I have to tell you something. So then he proceeded to tell me that he had to go. And I said, well, when are you going? And so when he said midnight tonight, that was bad. It was bad.
So I went down there, and there were 5 pilots from A3 pilots that had been. What had happened was the war in Vietnam had heated up, and the North Vietnamese had shot down a couple Air Force F4s with SAMs, and we had always thought that the SAM sites came in a pre-configured configuration with six missiles and with a radar in the center, and we'd been flying in photographic intelligence missions over North Vietnam, all up and down, trying to find these SAM sites, and we found some of them. But what we found out was that they would move the sites. They would move them, and they were mobile, and all they needed was a road and some open spots. They put a launcher here, and here, and the fan would be someplace else. And meanwhile, we were sending our strike Air Force, the Air Force and the Navy were sending their strike birds in, and the SAM sites weren't where they were supposed to be. So both the Navy and the Air Force were interested in trying to find the SAM sites. Well, the Navy squadron to do that was Fleet Air Reconnaissance Squadron 1, VQ-1. And they did a lot of super secret special work. They would go up along from Natsuki, Japan. They would go up and tickle the Russians out of Vladivostok, the North Koreans and the Chinese, get them to turn on their radars, plot their radars for them, and build up this intelligence and whatever. But they weren't doing a lot of overflying.